They say a house has a memory, that every wall holds a breath, every stair holds a footfall. Every light switch remembers the heat of your fingertip. I believe it, honey. I believe it with the soft parts of me. The night our house went dark, the walls held their breath with me, and I found out what kind of woman I was when there was no one around to sing me the answer. You'll hear the wind in a minute. There, do you hear it? Sounds like it's dragging a rake along the porch. The television winked out an hour ago, and the refrigerator stopped its hum like a child caught in the pantry. You set the candles out just like I taught you short. Wide ones so they don't tip. Little saucers to catch the wax. The cheap matches in the blue tin where your grandfather used to keep screws. You did good, Lily. I can see you by the window, moonlight in your hair, a silhouette like something drawn by a faithful pencil. Grandma, you said, when the lights went, are you scared? And I told you the truth. I have been scared every day of my life, but fear and I learned to share the same chair without pushing each other off of it. That's the trick, sweetheart. Not to kill the fear, just to learn to sit with it and do what needs doing. Come closer. Give me your hands. They're warm. Good. Maybe I'll tell you the longer version now that the house is listening. Maybe I'll tell you where I hid the line that saved me when everything else was torn away. And how revenge can sour in your stomach unless you stir it with mercy. Maybe I'll tell you who I used to be and how that woman learned to breathe again by candlelight. I was born in a kitchen with a cracked sink and a window that always stuck in the summer. Canton, Ohio, 1943. My mother, Lila, had hands that could slice through a pattern without a ruler, softer than flour, quicker than scissors. My father, Henry Butt, everyone called him Hank, worked the line at the stamping plant. His back hunched like a question mark by 40. He whistled Red River Valley out of the side of his mouth and always smelled like metal and soap. Whatever they were mine, and that was enough. We were poor in money, but noisy in love. Sundays, Mama would press our clothes with a bottle of water and a washcloth if she didn't have steam, and we'd walk to church barefoot to save our shoes. After service, we'd go by the pond and split a bologna sandwich into 4 squares. Ma handing them out like communion to me and my brother Will. He was 2 years younger, a hopper, always bouncing on the balls of his feet, even when he was standing still. His laugh was a light bulb that never burnt out. I learned early that a woman makes a list in her head every morning and marks it off without fanfare. Sweep, soak beans, mend collar, don't cry, keep the fire small, say your prayers. I added sing to my list despite the look Mama would give me when I lifted my voice over the sink. Quiet joy lasts longer, she said. Don't spend it all in a day. I tried. I did. But there's a rhythm in a body born with it, and sometimes it breaks out of you, like a bird hitting the glass. You know that feeling, Lily? You do? I see it. Will used to sit at my feet when I practiced on the busted upright piano in the school auditorium. The janitor, a man named Clem, with eyebrows like gray caterpillars, would let me in at dusk because he said my playing kept him from being lonely while he mopped. I practiced scales with my fingers curved just so, scales and scales, until my wrists ached and the high notes sounded like little bells. I wanted to be a music teacher. It was a ridiculous thing for a poor girl to want in 1958, and I wanted it with the ferocity of a person who has never left their county line. I believed, this is where I was young, that if you loved something enough, it would pull you in and feed you. I believed it the way you believe in the sun coming up. And I was wrong and I was right. The first time the world pulled the rug out from under me, I was 15, and it was summer and the dragonflies were thick as glitter over the water. Will and I were supposed to watch the clothesline while Mama ran to Mrs. Potter's to see about a hymn, and the wash danced in the pries. Like dozens of ghosts, sheets and undershirts clapping their hands at a joke we weren't in on. Will said, bet you can't skip a stone 5 times. And I, being me, set my jaw and said, 6, just to spite you. It's the smallest decisions that turn out to be levers big enough to move your whole life. I went to the bank, shoes in my hand, toes in mud, coins of light in the water. I bent through 1, 2, 3, 4 and I heard him say my name. I turned. He was up on the rocks where the water got deep and quiet. Aline, he called. Clean, he'd found a turtle, he said later. He wanted to show me the shell, the green lines like a map. I don't remember the turtle. I remember the empty water. Remember how quickly it can go from a mirror to a mouth. People tell you that drowning is quiet. They don't tell you that the quiet is a scream lodged under glass. 1 minute he was there, mouth open in delight, and the next he was a shadow under the black green. And my legs were water, my head was light, my skull a bell. I jumped. Of course I did. But the water was heavy, and he was heavier, and the weeds were hands. And by the time a man saw my flailing from the road and dragged us both out, I was a woman who had failed someone small and trusting. He was gone, just like that. The world kept its shape. That was the cruelty of it. The laundry danced. The dragonflies stitched light over the water. The sky was as perfectly blue as a saint's robe in a stained glass window. My mother cried without making a sound. My father went to work on Monday because what else do you do? There was no music in me, not for a long time. The day of the funeral, Mama put on lipstick. It was the strangest thing. She'd never bothered before. Pink that made her look like she'd bitten her lower lip. I watched her in the mirror and thought, so that's how you do it. You put your face on like a soldier, puts on a helmet, and you go to the front. Sometimes tenderness is war. Sometimes breathing is victory. That winter, my father brought home a box of parts and a schematic drawn on cigarette white paper. He said we could make a radio if we were careful, and we were careful, and on a Sunday night, a voice came out of a box that had been only dust and wire, and we sat around it like a campfire. Cleveland Indians, the man said. And the words were a rope thrown across the dark, and we grabbed it, all of us, and held on. If I wasn't going to drown in that pond, I knew I was going to have to make my own rope. The first boy who said I was pretty did it in a parking lot that smelled like spilled milk and hot tar. I was 17, and Cleveland felt like a bigger room in the same house. His name was Ray Fox, and if that sounds like a liar's name, baby. Fox. That's because some names come preloaded with their stories. He had a smile that made people hand him things. Tips, time, parts of their hearts they never planned to give away. He wore his hair greased back and his shirts ironed so sharp you could cut bread on them. He said he liked how I walked, like I had forgiving to do, and I said that was a cruel compliment. And he said that was why he liked me. I didn't like him. That was the problem. I liked how he liked me. I liked how it was to be wanted. That's a different thing, and it took me most of my life to learn it. I took a job at the diner on 4th, all glass and chrome, and a counter that ran the length of a Sunday afternoon. The manager, a woman named Bev, with a neck like a redwood trunk and earrings big as spare tires, taught me how to carry 3 plates without looking down. Eyes on the people, she said. They'll tell you before they tell you. She also taught me how to say no like a period, and how to call it an inside voice when what you really mean is a threat you're not ready to make. Ray would come in late and tip big when his friends were watching. When they weren't, he would tap his empty glass with a coin and expect me to hear it over a freight train. I heard it. That was part of the pull, too. The way he made everyone else seem like a radio station slightly out of tune. He asked me to go to the picture show, and I said yes, because I wanted to sit in the dark with someone hand in mine who wasn't TA doctor telling us we had to let go. We watched a movie with women in dresses that made their waists disappear like questions, and men who knew where they were going when they shut a car door. The smell of Ray's pomade made me dizzy, and when the hero kissed the girl, he squeezed my leg. See? He said into my hair, "That's us." He was wrong, and he was right. The night he hit me, it was snowing. That's an honest sentence, and I want you to hear it like a bell. I want you to hear it so the sound gets into your bones. Some firsts feel like a door opening. Some feel like a film of ash on your tongue. He wanted my tips that night. He said he'd pay me back. He always did. He had a sure thing with a guy who knew a guy. He said if I loved him, I'd help him. And I said loving isn't lending you my future. He laughed, and it was a cold sound, and the first slap was a surprise, and the second was a decision he made on purpose. I went down to the floor at Bev's feet. She didn't look at me. She looked at him long and clean and level. She took off one earring and put it in her apron, the way you might take off a ring before you knead dough. "I won't have trouble in my place," she said, and her voice didn't need anything from him. "And I won't have a thief in my place." He smiled like a charm in a window. "You think I'm scared of a woman?" "No," she said. "But you are afraid of the dark." And then she turned the lights off. I felt the lights go. Sometimes that's how you have to learn. It was a small blackout, just that rectangle of the world, but it was a lesson that wrote itself into me. There were a dozen people in that diner, and when the lights came back, there was a man whose hands were on Ray's shoulders and another who had his keys, and I was in the back room with Bev, thick hand on my cheek, holding my face steady like it was a cup about to overflow. "Say it," she said. "Say what you want. I want him gone," I said. "Good," she said. "That's the first useful thing you've said in months." I went home that night and Mama said, "You're late." And then she saw and didn't add anything to it. We sat at the table and she ran a cold spoon over my swelling lip and told me her mother had taught her that trick. "Did you love him?" she asked me. "I loved the door he held open," I said. I didn't look at the room. She nodded like that had been her own mistake once. "Rooms show themselves in time," she said. "And men do too." That was my first lesson in revenge. The kind that looks like leaving. It didn't taste sweet. It tasted like metal, but it kept me from swallowing him whole. I had a teacher in high school who told me I had hands like a pianist's. Long and clever, he said, as if he were the one who'd made them. He wrote me a letter for the program at the conservatory in Columbus that made my chest burn when I read it. "Eileen has sensitivity and discipline," he wrote, and I rested my fingers on the keys and thought, sensitivity I have in spades. Discipline I will have to borrow from women who never made it out of kitchens. I was accepted. They wanted me. The paper in my hand was proof of some other life where I became the kind of woman whose groceries were always paid for before she reached the car. But the registration fee was more than my mother's grocery money for a month. My father could have found it if he asked his brother. Maybe if he sold his fishing rods, if he skipped his own breath for a while. Maybe. He looked at me like I was a rung on a ladder and his foot was already in the air. "I can work," I said. "I'll work nights and go to school. I'll sleep when I'm dead." "That's not how it goes," he said softly. "I want to give you the world, but the lease is in another man's name." That was the second lesson. You can be good and you can be poor, and those two things can hold hands forever. I went to work instead of college. It felt like a betrayal I perpetrated against the girl who practiced scales until her wrists trembled. But the rent, the heat, the prescriptions that came in vials that rattled like tiny maracas, the adults had a way of lining them up on the counter, and you looked left to right and picked the ones you could afford. I moved to the city because every poor person knows you can hide better in the crowd. The buildings made a canyon the wind had to sing through. Your grandfather found me there. Thomas was the sort of man you don't notice at first if you've spent your youth liking a certain kind of trouble. He wasn't tall. He wasn't flashy. He had a face like a well-planed plank simple, steady, and a laugh like a door creak that warmed the winter out of the room. He worked as an apprentice electrician. "I make the dark honest," he said when I asked him what that meant. "I make it so the people who are supposed to be in it are the ones who chose it." He came into the diner on a Thursday. He ordered coffee and paid in exact change, even though he had plenty of singles in his clip. He said my name, the way a person says the name of a city they haven't been to but believe they would love. He watched my face like there was a song being played on it. He wanted to memorize. He carried a book with a bent spine everywhere he went. A book about circuits and codes and the laws of things you couldn't see. On our third walk, he said, "You do that with people. You learn the wiring by listening." I wanted to hear him say my name again. I wanted to hear it until my name meant something new. We were married in a room above the Polish bakery on a March Saturday that felt like God had forgotten to shut the freezer door. The radiator ticked like a nervous clock. We had hydrangeas in pickle jars and a cake that was too sweet in the best way. Bev came in a blue dress and cried into a napkin. My mother wore a hat that made her look like a woman who had ridden a train to see a man about a job. My father danced with me to a scratchy record like he was trying to pull the sorrow out of my shoulders with his two good hands. Thomas whispered, "We'll learn it together," into my ear, and I nodded like he had promised me something concrete and measurable. We learned the kind of arithmetic they don't test you on in school. What do you do when the doctor says the word mass and the air goes out of the room? What, S? The sum of one man laying wire in the rain for a union that keeps them half safe? Plus one woman as hands that never got to learn Beethoven but know how to make a pork roast stretch a week. Minus the hours you spend worrying about the hole in the roof. What's left of a day when you take the money for the heat and give it to a hospital instead? Those were the years of grit. That's what I call them. Joanne was born with hair like chestnut silk and a wail that sounded like a siren. We called her Jo because the name looked tidy stitched on a school sweater. She grew into her temper and a kindness with a sharp edge. 5 years later came my boy, Peter Pita, who had eyes like his father S and a way of making enemies into friends by offering the second half of his sandwich. Thomas worked and worked. I worked and worked. On Sundays, we took the kids to the big library downtown to run our fingers along spines with gold letters. For 10 minutes in that long room, we felt like the sort of people the world had been designed for. Then came the night our house went dark. I was 32 years old. We were in a row house with steps out front you could sit on and pretend you were in a place you were not. Rain had been falling for days. The ground was a sponge that wouldn't squeeze dry. Thomas had been laid off right before Christmas. They called it temporary, with the kind of smile that asks you to applaud. His union rep made speeches and bought beer, and nothing changed. The bills came like a marching band. The notices start polite. Second notice in red letters. Final notice in thicker red letters. Disconnection scheduled. It's a series of throats clearing. You tell yourself you have time because everything else you do requires time you don't have. Why should fear be different? We did what people do. We paid the rent because even when it was just us and 2 babies, I had learned to keep a roof when you're counting blessings on one hand. We paid what we could on gas. We paid nothing on electric because candles still exist and Thomas said he could manage. You make deals with yourself that sound reasonable until the day is actually here. Thomas had an interview that morning. He put on his one good tie, the navy one with the thin red stripe hand, combed his hair so flat it looked like it had been ironed. And he took a bus because the car had become an animal that drank gasoline. We couldn't tea-feed it anymore. "I'll be back before they come," he said. And he kissed me and left a constellation of coffee on the inside rim of my cup where his mouth had touched it. He didn't get the job. He didn't make it back before they came. He didn't do anything wrong. It's part of why the memory is sharp enough to open cans. The man from the utility company was a tall white man with a mustache like a push broom. He knocked like a neighbor. I opened the door expecting someone selling a vacuum, and in less than 5 minutes he took a pen and clipped something at the meter, and my house went from conversation to silence, from warmth to a cold that had been in the walls for years waiting. The refrigerator sighed and gave up. The lights blinked like eyelids. The fish in the tank made a slow circle like they were reading an assignment they didn't understand. "Please," I said, holding Jo's hand tight enough. She squirmed. "Have kids. My husband is working it out. It's on his way." He looked at me the way men sometimes do when they want to be kind, but the kindness has to travel through the concrete of their job to reach their face. "Ma'am," he said, "I have 40 more houses today. What I remember most is not the man. It's the quiet after the door closed. The way the house held its breath. The way my heart tried to make enough noise for everything. I carried the babies to the couch and sat and listened to the small things you daren't hear when the hum is happening. The clock that runs on a battery. The neighbor upstairs. The rain. My own blood. That was the moment, honey. That was it. I thought it was the bottom, and maybe it was the clearing before the bottom dropped even further. But it was where I heard my line. The one I've held on to ever since. It wasn't a word exactly. It was a knowing that there are men in trucks who do their job and women in kitchens who make the ground less hard by the way they stand on it. That there is a difference between the dark that happens and the dark you accept. I stood up. I put the kettle on the stove even though it wouldn't boil. I did it because a kettle on a stove looks like a home, and I needed that picture while my hands found the candles. I lit 2, 3, set them away from curious fingers. I pulled the quilts out and made a fort like the kind the kids loved. I did not cry. That was a small revenge against the part of the day that wanted to see me collapse. We ate peanut butter on crackers and told each other everything wonderful we could think of that had ever happened. Dad making us laugh by putting a colander on his head like a crown. The time a bird sat on the windowsill and cocked its head like it was checking on us. The yellow dress at the thrift store that fit me like someone had looked at my body while sewing it. The door opened and Thomas stood there, wet and defeated. He looked older. He looked like he had misplaced something important that he couldn't name. The flicker of the candles put small moons in his eyes. He took in the fort, took in the children. He took me in like I was the last light in a city. Didn't get it, he said. I know, I said, but we have tonight. He came to me. We sat on the floor under a blanket with our kids, and the rain made the roof into a drum, and the candles made shadows that crawled like friendly animals up the wall. Thomas took my hands and pressed them to his face and breathed in like my palms were bread fresh out of the oven. We'll fix it in the morning, I said. We'll figure it out. I already called the church. I'm calling Bev. I'm calling everyone. I wanted to give you more than this, he said. This is plenty, I lied. And tomorrow we'll get more. We fell asleep in a small, stubborn heap. Maybe you can picture it. Maybe you can smell the wax and the damp carpet and the salt. When I woke, the house was the sort of cold that sits in your bones like a memory you didn't ask for. The clock on the wall read wrong. The fish floated 3 little bodies, their mouths open like surprised O's. I went to the window. The street was a gray ribbon. The city was waking up to coffee and a hum I could hear in other people's kitchens. Ours was quiet. It felt like an accusation and like a dare. Fed the kids oatmeal I made on the propane camping stove we de-used once with my father near a lake that killed little boys. I dressed them in layers. I folded the notice from the utility company into a shape and put it in my pocket where it warmed with the heat of me. I kissed the tops of their heads and promised them the lights would come back. I walked to the church with a letter I'd written in pencil, because I knew if I tried a pen, I'd dig so hard into the paper it would tear. The woman at the church office had hair like a helmet. She looked at my letter while stirring sugar into a styrofoam cup and said, "We have many requests." I nodded like we were fighting the same war, and she couldn't save us both. She typed a little while into a computer that probably hummed all the time and told me there was a fund that could help $50 worth. I thanked her like she had saved my life, because that's the way you guard your own heart from bitterness. You praise what you can. I went to the city bureau, room after room of linoleum and chairs that were always just a little more scarred than you remembered. People in lines that looked like snakes made of faces. A man with his kid asleep on his jacket. A woman with her nails done, the color of expensive cherries in syrup. Because a person is allowed to be beautiful, even in a room designed to make you feel like a small problem. I watched a clerk talk to every person like they were a pothole on his way home. I stepped up and tried to make my voice steady. "Ma'am," the clerk said, when I asked if we could have another 2 weeks. "We have policies." "Yes," I said. "But some of us have children." "That's not a variable in the equation," he said. And I let myself think how sometimes men who learn to wire buildings for light become kinder than men who learn to wire the city for paperwork. Not always, but sometimes. I put down the money I had and walked out with a date and a number and a feeling like I had put a wet sponge in a burning building. On the way home, I saw Bev's blue dress in the window of the diner, the one she wore to my wedding. That's how you know a friend is a friend. You see them when you need them, even when they don't move. "Sit," she said, and pushed a glass of water at me like it was a commandment. I told her this story with only the facts. When you strip the adjectives off a tragedy, you make space for mercy to stick, she said. You want a job back full time. Said yes, even though my arms were tired from stirring and the kids would be sleeping on the bench there some nights. She said, "We'll make a donation jar." She said, I'll talk to Marty, whose cousin works over at the utility, and sometimes he forgets to turn things off. She said, you keep showing up. That's what people don't know how to do anymore. You keep showing up, and sometimes that's a crowbar. I went home with a good sandwich under my coat and a 20 in my bra and told Thomas we would be okay so many times that after a while he believed me. That was the biggest lie I ever told that ended up becoming truth. We made it through that week on grit and other people's mercy. A man from church came with 100 in an envelope. And didn't he stay to be thanked? The woman upstairs let me run an extension cord to plug in our fridge till we could make the bill. A neighbor, a quiet lady who fed the squirrels like they were pay-per-view, brought me batteries like they were gold coins. The lights came back on a Wednesday when I was folding towels and Joe whooped so loud she spooked the cat. I stood under the kitchen bulb and felt like a saint in a painting. I held up my hands to the light and swore something to the god of rundown kitchens. I swore I would never let another mother sit in the dark alone if I could help it. The part people don't talk about when they tell the I once was story is that sometimes the person you love doesn't stand up next to you. Sometimes he sits down. Sometimes he stays there. Thomas wore a shame so heavy it bent him. Men don't come with instructions on how to fix what failed in them. He found a bottle that was cheap and made of mean corn, and he poured himself into it, and when he came out, he was a smaller version of himself. I'm sorry, he said. In the mornings, the air sour with the night, and I said I knew, and made eggs, and hated him, and loved him, and wanted our life to be a thing you could hang like a picture on a freshly painted wall with no holes showing. The temper stored in Joe's small body turned into storms in her teens. She could make a room mean with a look. She could also be sweeter than strawberries. The day I found a zip bag in the pocket of her coat with white dust in it, I put my head on the cold top of the washing machine and asked the metal to be my friend. It's nothing, she said. It's a one-time thing. My mouth said the words I've heard 1,000 mothers say like a choir in a slow hymn. Not in this house, I said. Not in this life. My hands shook so hard I had to sit on them. You think the night our house went dark was the night I found my light? It was. It was also the first time I recognized the shape of my enemy. It wasn't the man from the utility, though I could draw his mustache with my eyes closed if you asked me to. It wasn't even the money, although money takes your hand in public and walks you across the street like a cruel friend if you let it. My enemy was the lie that tells you that things happen to you, that you don't get to answer back. My light was the answer. My light was a decision. I started calling women I knew. Women from church, women from the laundromat. Women who kept extra soup on the stove because they never knew what might come to their door. I said, we need a pot we can ladle out of when the cold comes. I said, we need a list of men with trucks. I said, we need to know whose cousin works at City Hall and whose niece can write. We made a circle and called it the Lantern Ladies because we liked how it sounded. And we bought 6 little lamps that ran on oil and put them on a shelf in the church basement with a notebook beneath. So you could sign your name, take a lamp, bring it back when your light returned. We don't ask questions, I said, because shame grows in the dark and we were in the business of preventing mold. What no one tells you when you begin to save other people is that you are putting your fingers into a machine with moving parts. Our landlord, Mr. Klein, found out about the extension cords and called the fire marshal and threatened to evict the woman upstairs, the quiet one with the squirrel peanuts. He had a suit the color of old snow and a gold ring that looked like it was always talking. He said, my insurance, and my liability, and my property, and my ears roared. I did the desk hand tapping thing I learned from the city clerks. I asked him for the number of his lawyer. I wrote a letter to the paper. Then I remembered Bev's lights. It's the way the dark had come down like a curtain and made a point. I made mine with paper. I wrote about how quickly a house goes quiet, and about fish floating belly up, and about the way a woman smiles at a man with a mustache because she has to if she wants her refrigerator to hum again. I used plain words because plain words are like stones. You can build with them. The paper printed it. The church ladies clipped it and taped it to their fridges with tiny magnets shaped like fruit. Donations arrived in envelopes that smelled like different houses. 6 months later, we had enough to keep 20 people in the light for a month if the timing was right. Klein didn't like that. He said people who can't pay for lights shouldn't have them. I said people who own 8 buildings should be kinder because kindness is cheaper than court. He smirked like a eat what oo kill man, and that's when I learned revenge could be paperwork. I went to the city records. I sat under the flickering fluorescence with a pencil you couldn't T-sharpen if your life depended on it and pulled folder after folder till I found one with his name and a number that didn't T-match. Code violations he'd ignored. Certificates he hadn't renewed. I didn't break a lock. I didn't wiggle a wire. I read. I filed complaints using my best Sunday handwriting. I put copies in an envelope addressed strictly, cleanly. He got fined for pipes that banged like angry ghosts. He got fined for a staircase that wobbled under old women. He got fined for boiling radiators and paint that peeled like a snake. He called me a witch in the hallway. I said that if by that he meant a woman who knows where things are kept. Yes, thank you. He threatened to raise the rent. I said we'd meet him at a hearing with our hair combed and our rent receipts in order. He learned to fix what he should have fixed. That was my favorite revenge, and I slept better for it. I wish I could tell you that where the suffering receded like a tide that finally gets tired. Americans love a clean second act. We love a third act where everything gets put back where it belongs. But life is a messy drawer, and sometimes you cut yourself reaching in. When Jo turned 19, she met a boy with a laugh like a match struck close to your ear. His name was Cody, and he had raised charm in a cheaper jacket. He loved her quick and sloppy, and she loved him like she was running across a freeway. I saw it. I said nothing useful that stuck because the thing about a road like that is you have to see the trucks for yourself. Petey took his father's quiet and made something holy out of it. He learned to fix clocks and radios, anything with a heart that ticked. He liked to stand in other people's kitchens and make their toasters work again. They loved him for it. When he joined the Navy, I cried into his shirt until he laughed and said saltwater was only going to be new to him the first day. He came back with a tattoo of a ship, S-wheel on his shoulder, and a look in his eyes like he had learned what to do with his hands when there was nothing left to hold. Thomas slid in and out of the bottle like a man in a sweater that Dawson tea fit but smells like home. Sometimes he cut it out. Sometimes he didn't. He told me once that the silence after the lights go off is like the moment after a car hits a tree. You can hear a single leaf fall. I couldn't stand it, he said. I needed noise. He loved me, Lily. I will die believing it. He just didn't always know how to stay. Cody took Jo's hand and pulled her to the edges of rooms. It happens slow when you're in it. From the outside, it is a flick book. You can flip fast. First the phone calls at odd hours, then the missed shifts. Then the stains that get explained like unlucky furniture. Then the days you can't account for. Then the glassy glaze. Then the lie that you are one of those who can stop whenever. I did things I'm not proud of in the name of saving my child. I stole from Thomas's cigar tin. I sold my mother's thimble with the nick in it that had lived in the sugar jar for 20 years. I lied to Petey's face when he asked if we were okay. I took my own veins and braided a rope from them and tried to pull my girl back, and still she slipped and slipped. There was a night I will tell you about because I promised you the truth, and stories without the broken parts are sculptures with no chips. You don't trust them. I found her in a bathroom stall with her head lolling like a late sunflower. Her lips were blue. I slapped her in the rosy center of her cheek where she had been a baby, and she came back angry. What did you do that for? She slurred. And I wanted to lay down on the tile and die. I didn't. I found my light, and it was a hard one. A fluorescent that makes you look worse than you are. I stood her up and put her in a tub and turned the water cold and sat while she cursed me. I called a number and said words I didn't want to say. It was a small revenge against the part of me that wanted to hug her and say it was fine. It wasn't fine. I will go to my grave knowing that it wasn't tea. Fine, but that she was mine and I was hers, and the world is made of those two sentences. There are so many more nights, baby. Nights when the house went dark because of weather. Nights when it went dark because of men. Nights when it went dark because my eyes closed and I dreamed myself back to a bank and a voice saying my name and water that was a mouth. I learned to buy candles in bulk. I learned to keep a jar of coins we called the meter money. I learned the sound of my own strength and the taste of surrender and how they are both bitter and both necessary. I'm old now. I laugh and I forget why. I cry for women in grocery stores who put things back and pretend they changed their minds. I get mad like a young girl when the clerk looks through me. I carry your hand in mine like it is a hot roll, and I keep tearing pieces off to give back to you. You asked me if I was scared. I told you yes, and I meant it. I'm scared tonight because the wind knows our address and the rain is writing our names on the street. I'm scared because the house holds memories, and tonight it is holding all of them. But I have more story if you have more time and more candle. The second time I learned what it means to be seen was the night. Petey came home with a girl whose eyes looked like somebody had turned off the inside switch, and she had Dan T found it yet. She wore a coat in July, and her hands were too thin to hold a glass without sounding like wind chimes. Her name was Mara, and she became my daughter without anyone signing a paper. She watched me make eggs as if I were performing a ritual. "It's just breakfast," I said. "It's just salvation." She said back so quiet I thought maybe I'd imagined it. I watched the way Petey put his body between her and loud noises. I watched the way he never reached for her without saying her name first. He worked with Thomas on the roof that summer, patching what should have been replaced, singing the same 3 lines of a song because they were the only ones they knew. There were 3 days in a row when Thomas came in without the sour on him. And when I kissed his cheek at night, he smelled like tar and pride, and I let myself dream like a fool. Then came August. Then came a phone call. Then came a siren and a cab ride and a hallway where laughter sounds like blasphemy because it can possibly live there. Then came a constable with hands too big for his job. Then came a sentence that swallowed me and spit me out different. "Mrs. James, there's been an accident. Thomas fell. Wasn't dramatic. There was no arc to it. There was heat and a step and then air where wood should have been, and his head found the only hard place available. He died on a Tuesday. The world kept its shape. It was cruel enough to do that. Men patched the hole. They hammered. They moved the ladder. I had to pick between 2 days for the funeral, like I was circling an option on a form at the bureau. I slept with his shirt and woke with buttons printed on my cheek. The house went dark because I forgot to pay the bill. Not because I didn't have the money. It's because grief is a tunnel where everything echoes. And sometimes you can find the light switch that S right there where it has always been. The kids lit the candles this time. Edie found the kettle and put it on because the picture matters. Jo rolled her eyes with a gentleness I had prayed for but never expected. "We know how to do this," she said, and I wanted to tell her I had wanted to teach her different things, how to fold a fitted sheet maybe, or how to change the oil in a car. But we teach what we know. We teach how to sing in the dark. A week after we put your grandfather in the ground, Mara told me she was carrying a child. She thought I'd be angry. Grief had hollowed me out like a dry gourd and put a candle in me and said, "Make a face." But I remembered the way a woman's hands look when she holds her stomach at 12 weeks. Like she's cupping a secret that makes the world bearable. I wanted the world to be bearable. I put my hands over hers and said, "We'll make room." Room is a funny thing. You think you don't have any more until you have to. You arrived 2 months early in a hospital that smelled like citrus and bleach. You were the color of a wet peach. Your cry was so small, you needed a machine to amplify it into a sound humans could hear. I put my finger in your palm and you held on to me like someone who has been swimming a very long time finally finds a rope. "Hi," I said. "I'm your Aline." Your eyes were closed and I loved you so much I was dizzy with it. My blood like fizzy water. The nurse cried because she had not seen that much joy in a year full of broken ankles and a flu that came in angry waves. That was your light. That was mine too. See? That's the trick. The light you find becomes the light you hand off. And then you re-old and the house goes dark and you not frightened like you were. Because the light is sitting beside you in a sweater with her hair in a knot, making the candles stand up straight. When Joe came back after a long absence with cheeks like paper and eyes that had seen too much, she went straight to your little bassinet and didn't look at me. She looked at you and said, "Well, I'll be damned." I didn't correct her, and that should tell you something about what you can expect from me when you make me a great-grandmother. I will let you say damn if it seems appropriate. Cody showed up at the funeral like a stain someone tried to scrub out too late. It sounds mean to say it that way, but I promised you the truth. He had hat in hand. That was literal. In his hat, he had 2 carnations and a letter. It's not what you think he said, and I said it never is, and that was the moment. I let go of the idea that my revenge would be a dramatic speech or a slap on a cheek or a night in a police station. My revenge, my real limp, sturdy, truthful revenge, was that my house kept making dinners after a long day. My revenge was that my table was set for whoever came in good faith. My revenge was that the lights were on as much as I could manage it, and when they were in tea, we knew what to do. You're looking at me like I left something out. I did. The night I burned a letter, but that est another candle, and I want to light it carefully because it runs hot and leaves a smudge. For now, know this. The worst thing that happened to me fooled me into thinking it would be the headline forever. It wasn't. The headline changes. Sometimes the headline is Woman Starts Fund with 6 lamps. Sometimes it's Boy Brings Girl Home and she eats. It's 2 eggs and smiles. Sometimes it's Old Hands Still Know How to Smooth. It's a child's hair. The night our house went dark, I found my light. It was a small one. It was enough to start a fire. The wind is tired of being noisy. Do you hear it? Even storms have to sleep. Hand me the blue tin. That's it, the matches. I Ella light one more, and then we Ella blow them all out and fall asleep with the hum of our own bodies. You did good tonight, Lily. You listened to everything you could. You didn't flinch at the ugly parts. You held my hand when I told you the true by-blood pieces of me. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the letter. Tomorrow I'll tell you why I kept a dress in a paper bag under my bed for decades, and what it meant when I finally put it on and locked the door and looked at myself without a map. Tomorrow I'll tell you how I made peace with a girl who wanted to be a music teacher, and the woman who stood at a doorway with a man's mustache in her eyes and polite fury behind her smile. For now, let me see your face by the candlelight. There you are. That's my light too. We can share it. Let the house hold this memory. Let the dark think it can have us. We know better. Always did. And if you wake in the night and your heart is loud, put your hand on the wall and feel it holding you back the way it has done. For every woman who ever stood in a kitchen and made a promise to a small person in pajamas. Talk to the quiet the way you'd talk to a horse. Calm, honest, a little amused. Tell it your name. It will know it. It has heard it before.